Hi, if you're here and you're watching this video, that means that you're looking for some AP Computer Science A-Prep. If you don't already know me, my name is Aditya Anandan. I'm a senior at Irvington High School in Fremont, California. Last year, I took the AP CSA exam digitally and I got a 5. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of what it takes to get a 5 on the exam and how you should prepare and what content you need to prepare. If you're on my YouTube channel, make sure to go check out my Thinkific course. We have practice quizzes, we have worksheets, we have practice tests, and we have these conceptual overview videos that you're going to be watching. We also have some breakdowns on MCQs and FRQs that are going to be really helpful for how to think through problems and how exactly to solve them. So without further ado, let's get to the lesson. Alright, so let's start with Unit 5. Unit 5, honestly, is one of my favorite units because it deals with arrays, array lists, and 2D arrays. And I like arrays because they help me a lot in programming in general, and I've used them a lot, especially in game design when you have to like define positions and stuff like that. So they are pretty important. Okay, so and they are also important to the APCSA test at the exam. uh the arrays, in my actual experience, arrays made up easily 50% of the MCQ questions, easily, and like that's honestly an understatement. And then two of the FRQ questions are, I think, guaranteed to be array questions. Question 3 and question 4 will test your knowledge about arrays. So arrays, hands down, one of the most important concepts in APCSA. So make sure to have a great understanding of this, and I think you'll be well set for the exam. If you knew just arrays and loops and you didn't know any of the other stuff, I think you could get a 5 on the exam. I'm not even joking. Like, those two concepts are the single most important concepts that they emphasize in APCSA. Alright, so before we actually start with the the actual coding part of this, and defining an array and all of 2D arrays and stuff like that, let's ask ourselves, what exactly is an array? Well, an array is just a list of objects. I'm sure you probably know what a list is, and it's just a list. So, it could be a list of integers, a list of doubles, a list of strings, a list of, objects, classes. I don't know. It could be a list of anything. Uh, and so that's what an array is. Now let's go on to defining an array. So define an array by saying int. Okay, so let's go over each part of this. Let me just move this interface that I have. Okay, so the first part of this is this integer part. So that signifies the type of the array. We have that also over here, which is doing the same thing. It's just these two have to be the same. The integer and the integer have to be the same. Then what this does is this the square brackets, that tells you that this is an array. Okay, the third part of this, which is this ARR, is the name of the array. That can be anything you want. It's like a variable. It can be anything you want, or an instance of a class. It can be whatever you want it to be. Then we have this new part, which just says that it's a new array. And then finally, I think one of the most important parts of this is this 5 part over here, the square brackets and the 5 within. What that tells Java is the amount of slots it needs to open for the array. So in this case, it's opening up 5 new slots for the array. And I think of these array uh, spaces as slots. So if you don't give the slots specific values, they initialize to 0 by default. So it'll be 0, 0, 0, and 0, because these are 5 blank slots. Alright, there are multiple ways to define an array. You can have something like int array. You could switch the array and the square brackets, and it'll still work. Make sure to keep the new int 5 the same though. You could even say int array this, do a new space, and then say array equals to new int 5. But you have to like couple these. Okay, so these are the same. And then you can have yeah, so you can define it. You can define an array like this, or you can define an array like this. You can say int array equals 1 2, 3, 4, 5. So by doing this, what you do is you actually forcibly set the values of the array to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is how exactly to traverse an array. The first way to traverse an array is simply through a normal for loop. I think we've discussed for loops before in unit 2, and we're just going to expand upon that to, go through the array. So let's say we have an array that has 5 slots. We've already defined that here, and suppose all we do is, damn, my computer's bugging out right now. Okay, yeah, we're back. So suppose we have an array with 5 slots, and what we want to do is we want to go through this array and individually set each slot. Okay, so or we want to traverse through this array. Traversing essentially means you're going through each slot of the array. And now, so within this array, let's use a for loop, and we label this section traversal because we're traversing the array. So how you would do this? You would say for int I equals to 0. I less than arr dot length I plus plus, and suppose there's a pre-existing value that we've defined. It's an integer value. We just set it to 0. We will say, make this a 0. We will say plus equals to array of. So let's again go through each line in this code. The first thing we have is we're setting int I equals to 0. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. We're setting the integer I equals to 0, so it's going from I, and then we're saying I is now less than arr.length. So arr.length is an inbuilt function in Java. It's not a method. Remember that. It's not a method, but it's some function that what it does is that it will return the number of slots within the array. Okay, so notice that we're not going up till the slot limit. We're going one less than that slot limit. So let's go back to that array that we defined before. What was it? Was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? I think it was. Suppose the array is like this. We have 5 open slots here. The first slot is going to be labeled array of 0. The last slot is array of array.length minus 1, because array.length will return 5, right? What we want is the last value to be 4. So this is array of 4, right? So it starts at 0 and it goes up till the array length minus 1. Just remember that. Okay, that's what we're doing here. Notice that we're just going up till the first value, which is 0, and we're going up till array length minus 1. Because we're doing less than array length, we're doing 1 before array length, which is that. We could also just change this, and we will have array less than or equal to array length minus 1, and we have the remaining stuff. Okay, so this is also equally as valid. Okay, suppose we have this value plus equals to array.I. Value is equal to 0. What this will do is it'll do 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. That is 15. Okay, cool. The next topic that we want to talk about is passing by reference. So passing by reference, what that means is essentially the array itself, it's changed when you call it in a method. We are not creating a copy of it. So to do that, let's go back to integers, doubles, and all of the variable types that we talked about. So an integer, double, and a boolean, when they are passed in a method, which means when they are taken as a parameter in a method, within the method, those values are not changed. So let me give you an example. Okay, in a client program or in a program, let's say we've already defined a method that simply just adds 1 to an integer. Okay, so let's have an integer. We'll call it int a equals to 1, and let us say call add 1 of a. Okay, so add 1, what it'll do is it'll take a parameter which is an integer and it'll just add 1 to that. That's pretty self-explanatory, right? So after this, what do you think the value of a is going to be? Do you think it's going to be 2? Do you think it's going to be 1? Do you think it's going to be null? What do you think it's going to be? The answer is a is going to be 1. It's going to be the same as before, because within this method, we are creating a copy of a and we are incrementing that by 1. But this a, the one that we have here, remains the same. This a over here, it's chilling. It did nothing. It's not being changed at all. It's staying the same. The same applies to doubles. The same applies to booleans. all the integer types that we talked about in unit 1, they remain the same. But for strings, it's a little bit different. Strings are actually changed because strings are an object and objects are passed by reference. Passed by reference means that this a value, if it were an object and not an integer, it would be actually changed. It would not be passed by value, which means a copy is created. It's actually changed. And the same applies to arrays. With arrays, if you pass it as a parameter, that means that the array itself is being changed. Okay, and I think a good way to think about this is the swap method. And for reference of the swap method, go check out the overview of this chapter that we have, this unit. Go check it out. I have put the swap method in, and what the swap method does for all of you that are gonna go check it out is that it'll take two spots of the array, like let's say 0 and 3, or 0 and the last spot, which is 0 and 3 here, and it will just swap them. So after the method is called, the array will look like 3, 1, 2, 0, because we are swapping 0 and 3. Okay. uh yeah, that's pretty much all we want to talk about with arrays and passing by reference. The next thing is arrays and objects. So arrays can be within objects and objects can be within arrays. So you could have an array of objects and you could have an object with an array as a parameter. Okay, so just keep that in mind. They might give you some obscure thing where you have an array within an object or something like that. Just know your principles and you'll be fine. You could also check out the card deck example that I gave in the overview of this unit. Okay. Next thing we want to talk about is ArrayLists. ArrayLists are actually very useful because what they do is that they simplify arrays to a point where you can do a lot of stuff with them. Okay, so an array list is different than the array because of two things. Number one, it is not an array itself. It doesn't have actual integers and doubles. It has something called objects, which are called integers and doubles. Okay, that is the first difference. The second difference is that you can call actual methods with an array list. It itself is an object. Okay, so array lists, what they do is that they allow you to modify and to control arrays in a way that you can't do with actual arrays. So with an actual array, let's say we have an array with 1, 2, 3, 4. If you wanted to remove a certain slot, if you wanted to remove, let's say, this 3, it's practically impossible. You would have to go through a long, winded code block. You would have to change it to the point where it really isn't necessary to actually use that array. You could just create a new array without the 3, right? So it's very complicated to, shorten or change values within the array, okay? Another thing is that you want to be able to control each value within an array separately and to change it. Within actual arrays, it's possible, but yet again, it's lengthy. All right, so yeah. So in ArrayLists have several methods that you could use to control these things. All right. So within an array list, you define an array list like this. You would say ArrayList. Oh my god, my handwriting is total crap. Then okay. So yet again, it's very similar to arrays. We are defining the array list. We're saying that it's an array list over here. We're saying that E just stands for a certain object type. It could be capital I integer. It could be double. It could be strings. It could be whatever you want. Be another object. New array list, same thing. It's an array list. E, we talked about it, and slots, as we did with arrays, it's a slot. Okay, defining an array list. We talked about that, and just know how to do it. If they ask you, if they show you an array list, you should know what each part means. Okay, so there are a few methods to talk about for array lists. First thing is add. So if you have an array list, oh, sorry. Okay, I completely forgot this. We would have array list, and then we would have the name. Okay, sorry. So name equals to new. Don't forget the name, because that's that's pretty important to the array list. Okay, so the name is also, this can be anything, like an arrays. So very similar to arrays in terms of defining it. It's just you've got a little bit more brackets to deal with, right? So the first method I want to talk about is the add method. So the add method, all it does is that it takes a parameter, which is the element, and it just adds it to the end of the array list. So let's say we had an integer array and we want to add an integer, we would say add 0. It would just put 0 at the end of the array. Second thing is add, but with specification. We would say add index comma element. What does that? So I'm gonna use like a template that I'm gonna use to discuss all this. Well, the template can just be 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's say we click add element and we put add element. Instead of element we put 0. What this would do is this would just add 0 to the end, so it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. But let's say we do add element and we say 1 comma 0. Now 0 is gonna be in the first spot of the array, which will make 1, 0, 2, 3, 4. Because obviously array of 1 would be the second value, and it's essentially being replaced at the second value. It's just pushing everything back, and that's what we see over here. The third thing is the third method is size. Size just returns. It's much like length. It just returns the number of slots, so it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. So this will return 4. We have set. So set, what that does is that it's like very much like add, but it will replace a certain value with the array. So if we have set, and we have 0, and then we have 2, which we want to do, the first value within that array is the one that's going to be, because obviously array of 0 is the first value. So keep remembering that array of 0 is the first point, and everything goes from there. So with this specific method, you take the index that is given and you replace that with the value that is given. So in this case, the first value is being replaced with 2. So it's now 2, 2, 3, 4. Okay, cool. Size, we did that. So now the next thing is get. It's simply like doing the thing where you have array and then the brackets, and we find the index. It's very much like that. What we're doing here is that we're saying get, and we're saying an index. Let's say get of 2. And what this does is returns the second value, or the third value in this case. Sorry about that. Even I get confused. So it's very hard to keep track of these things, but you have to know in your mind that it starts from 0 and it goes to array.length minus 1. If you don't understand that, and if you forget that during the test, you will get screwed tremendously, and it'll be a complete mess. So make sure to remember that. Okay, so get 2 will return the third value in the array. So if this is 0, if this is 1, and this is 2, then what is the third value? It's 3. Return 3. Okay, the last method that we're going to be talking about is remove. So remove it's pretty simple. So if we say remove 2, it just takes away the value at index 2. So now the second value is 3. So we just do 1, 2, 4. It shortens the array. As you can see with array lists, they're very dynamic. You can change them however you want, and yeah, they're pretty simple to use. But the one problem with array lists is that they do not take actual integers and doubles, like I explained before. They take something called an integer object and a double object with capital I and D. So these objects are they're essentially like integers and doubles, except they're not actual variables. They're a class. And within the course, this unit overview, you will be able to see exactly what some of their properties. But I doubt that the APCSA exam is going to cover this in depth. It's not that big of a deal. All you need to know is that it doesn't actually use ints and doubles. It uses like a variation of that, which is a class. Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of arrays and array lists is traversal of an array list. So when I talked about arrays, I talked about the first way to traverse them, which is using a for loop. The second way to traverse them is using a for each loop, or as I like to call them, an enhanced for loop. Enhanced for loops, what they do is that they automatically go through each value of the array. They're pretty cool in that, let's say you have an array or an array list. This could be anything. This could be an array list or an array, and we have it called ARR. So at ARR, we will just say for ARR is an integer array. Let's just assume it's integer. So we will just say for int a in ARR, and then we do whatever you want here. Okay, this is pretty cool. As you can see, like, it allows you to go through the array without actually going through all the hassle of writing the for loop, right? So as usual, we have this int. You have to specify that has to be the type of the array, and then we have ARR. So the one problem with for each loop is that you can't change the array or the array list using a for each loop. It's very, very hard to do that. it won't work, and there will be a lot of complications using a for each loop and you're trying to actually delete or insert certain elements. Okay, so just make sure to just use it to sort of return values or to modify values, but never delete values or change the size of the array. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it for arrays and array lists. The last topic that I'm going to discuss is something called 2D arrays. 2D arrays are well, they're pretty simple. They are just an array with now two columns. You have the rows and then you have the columns. Okay, so you have two indexes this time. Remember when we had an array that was just like one line, we had one index. Now you have the row index and then you have the column index. Okay, so 2D arrays can get pretty complicated, especially at the AP test, because they make you like traverse through some weird stuff. They will make you traverse through an entire 2D array and to return what is going on. So these can take a bit of time to just traverse through them and to understand them and understand the problem, but with a bunch of practice I'm sure you can succeed in this. It's not that big of a deal. So how you define a 2D array is through it's very simple to all of the definitions that we've done. We just do the type now, but now we have two and we call this matrix. It could be whatever you want. When we say new double, and right here we will say 3 comma 4. So what this does is that it'll create a new array that is like this. So now the number of rows will be 3, the number of columns will be 4. So look at this. This is kinda sick. This is rad. Notice that we've got 3 rows, we've got 4 columns, right? And that's how you define an array list. To traverse them, you use a for loop. You have to have two. So to traverse them, we're going back to nested for loops. This is why I said nested for loops can get a little complicated, because when you're using them to traverse through a 2D array, things can get kind of weird and you have to know exactly what you're doing. So you would say for row less than array dot length, then row. Pretty simple, right? We discussed this in the arrays part of this video. Now we're just extrapolating that to array list. Here's where things get weird. We add another for loop called for column equals to 0 column less than array 0 dot length, and we say column plus plus. Okay, and then we do whatever code we want. All right, this stuff is kind of weird when you think about it, but notice that you have an array of arrays here. So we have 3 arrays sort of stacked on top of each other. So first what we're doing is we're looking at the array as a whole, and then we're looking at each array specifically. So that's what we're doing here. We're saying array, we're going through the first array, which is this whole thing. We're going through each column, but within each column, we're going through each value by looking at each array separately. So if that doesn't make sense, you can go and check out, yet again, the overview. So with these later chapters, I think it's really important for you to go and check out the overview of each unit, because it can get a little complicated, and I think it's a great idea to, see a few examples that can help contextualize the concepts for you. All right. You can also use a for each loop for these. So this probably makes things a lot simpler, but yet again, you won't really be able to do much with a for each loop if you're looking to, delete values and stuff like that. So it can get messy if you try to do that. So for and I'm just assuming that this 2D array is called ARR because, well, it's the easiest name for me to think of in array. So this pretty much does the same thing. You're looking at each row here, and then you're looking at each column here. All right. Last topic that I'm going to discuss here is major and minor diagonals. So think of a 2D array like this. Let's just draw a box, and then you have We'll create 3 columns. We'll create 3 rows. These aren't straight lines, but whatever. I cannot draw for anything. The major, what the hell? Okay, the major diagonal is like this. It's these 3 values. So the diagonals only are valid if rows equals to columns, okay? And the major diagonal is array of I comma I, where I is a valid number in the array. So as you can see, this one will be 0 comma 0, this one is 1 comma 1, and the third one is 2 comma 2. Okay. Now the minor diagonal, like the major diagonal, let me just delete this stuff here. Minor diagonal is a little bit different in that it goes from here all the way to here. Okay, so this one is not array of I to I. This one is array of I to size minus I minus I. So as you can see, you subtract or sorry, no, minus I minus 1. Okay, so as you can see, this will be 0. This will be 0 comma something. This will be 1 comma something. This will be 2 comma something. So it's gonna be the same. It's gonna be some value that's within the array. But now, if the size of the array is 2, this one will be 2 minus 1 minus 0. Okay, so let's do it for the third row. Okay, so if we do size is what? Size is 2, right? Because there's 3 columns, so the size will be, the size will be 3. All right, so if the size is 3, okay, so we do 3 minus I, which is 2, minus 1 equals 0. So then we have 1, 2, comma 0. Now for this one, we have size, which is 3 minus 1 minus 1 gives you 1. So it'll be 1 comma 1. And for this one, we get 3 minus 0 minus 1 equals 2. So 0 comma 2. Okay, you got that? This can be pretty complicated to understand. We have there are ways to understand it in terms of math and matrices, and that I'm not sure you guys want to know that. That's it's not really important, but I think the basic understanding is that for major diagonal it sort of looks like this, and the minor diagonal it looks like this, and you kind of have to memorize the I comma I or I comma size minus I minus 1. Those are the 2 major points of major and minor diagonal. Yet again, major and minor diagonal, it's not that big of a concept, so if you don't know it, I think you'll be fine. But as always, if you really want to be thorough studying for the exam, it's probably a good idea to know this. And yeah, I think that's it to do with arrays and 2D arrays and array lists. This is a lot of stuff. I mean, this chapter is very dense, and I think it takes a lot of time and effort to get to know this stuff really well. But I think with some practice and I think these videos and overviews will help. I think you should be able to understand these concepts as a whole, and I think that's it. I mean, if you guys have any questions for me, make sure to shoot me an email. Make sure to write down in the description box below if you have any questions, any comments, what you want me to cover next. And if you're on my Thinkific course, thanks again for supporting me. Thank you guys. Peace out.